Just introducing.
Okay. I'm going to make an assumption and say good afternoon, but just in case, I'll also throw a good morning in to everybody joining us here today. I'm Melissa Wisner, and I am working as a IT project and portfolio manager at North Carolina State University Library. I've been here for about 5 months now. Prior to that, I served in a similar capacity as IT project portfolio manager at Yale University Library. And I want to acknowledge one thing that I know for many of us, this is likely our first full week back at work after a break, and it's Friday afternoon. So again, thank you for making time to be here today to join in this discussion. My topic for today is going to be before action reviews, or how to begin a project through inquiry. The basic format of what we'll do is here. I'd like to begin with an overview of what a before action review is, at least in my own experience. I'd like to talk to other folks about this method or other forms of inquiry-based planning that you may use at your own institution. It's always nice to talk to other project managers. Often I find I'm one of one where I'm working. So to be able to talk with other people, what you do and understand what you do is always a nice benefit. And about the halfway through this hour, I think we should be at the point where we can do a modified before action review. This it's just, I thought it would be worthwhile to walk through the process, and we'll be using the information I sent out ahead of time. If you happen to see that, just some general information about a hypothetical project that will involve renovating a library building. And then we'll have time for questions, so that's the basic format. And again, if this is not the class you signed up for, please feel free to disconnect. But hopefully this sounds interesting and we all learn something from each other. Okay. So as project managers, and I also want to give a shout out to any business analysts that may be joining us as well, or if you have to play both those roles. And I do see them as separate roles, but for the PM and BAs out there, looking at this list, we all know that these reflect a lot of the standard project artifacts that we're asked to pull together. A detailed project plan, you might even have charters that you do depending on the scope of the project or the complexity of your organization. We take steps to identify risk and risk strategies. We may even create a very formal list or registry of stakeholders. There's GitHub repositories, communications plans, all of these artifacts. Again, we spend a great deal of time crafting and trying to, again, detail what it is that we're going to do. And these artifacts tend to reflect how we're going to do. But what I think is unique about a before action review, again, is that it's adding what I call the why. So again, the artifacts that we tend to prepare and people tend to expect from a PMBA reflect largely what it is that we're going to do and how we'll accomplish it, and generally the who. Again, my background is primarily managing a full range of IT projects from low tech to high tech. But this might sound familiar to folks, you know, that you hear something, an email comes out or your boss tells you, we're going to do this thing. We're going to implement the discovery layer for searching archival special collections, or you know that IT staff are being allocated to work on that. We're also going to get some participation from vendor, or we'll, you know, if it's open source, whatever it might be. So again, the what and the how, and sometimes the who. And again, that's generally how a lot of communication tends to happen about a project. But in my own experience, and we can certainly talk about this throughout, the one piece that I always thought needed more emphasis was the why. Why are we going to do this thing? Why are we choosing this over other things? Why is it important? Why have we identified this as, being a priority? Why is it important to ask questions? And I got to have at least one Simpsons reference. And I think it's because sometimes people do have trouble thinking through the outcomes of their decisions. So anything that we can do as PMBAs in our organization to help encourage inquiry around our work, I think is an important part of our role. I do think most people have experience, if you've participated or led a project, to do an after-action review. And that, as we know, happens at the end of an effort. And we take time. Sometimes if the project went well, we don't do this. Usually it's if something has gone wrong enough or off course enough that it garners attention outside your department, someone may say, hey, well, let's take a moment to reflect on what went well, what could we have done better, and what we might do differently next time. So fairly standard. And again, what you notice about those three typical questions, they all reflect the past. Obviously, it's an after-action review, but we're talking about, well, what could we do better next time? What did we think we should have done differently? But you're talking about, what happened in the past. So at that point, I believe it's very useful information. But the value that it brings to an organization is if you apply it, we talk about applying the lessons learned through a project. You only realize that value if you do in fact apply it the next time you're looking at a project, or if there are operational aspects of what you've done that, contributed to any degree of failure, or again, what you're considering could have gone better. So having gone through several after action reviews, it seemed something was missing for me. So I'm like, well, where's the other bookend to this? Where is a before action review? And again, right there in the name, it gives you the opportunity to think through the problem, the need, an idea before any of your effort begins. So the way that I tend to approach a before action review, same format. I have 3 standard questions that I ask. So what are we trying to accomplish? What do we think is going to change? And how will we know if we're successful? And why those 3 particular questions? And I should also say at this point, again, referring back to that list of standard artifacts that we'll pull together, very often we work on that, sometimes with a peer, sometimes by ourselves. That has often been my experience too. They just say, you're the PM, you do the project plan, you do the project charter, and you kind of, do a review with sponsors, they look at it, but basically you're the sole author sometimes. And, a before action review gives you the opportunity to bring all your project stakeholders, whether they're end users, stakeholders, or administrative stakeholders, for everybody to come together. And I do see this type of meeting, that's usually how I'll hold it, as different from a project kickoff meeting. And we can talk about that too if you want to come back to that idea. Is this part of a kickoff meeting, or is it, when would you schedule something like this? And ideally, the earlier in the process, the better. I do think it's important to have a project kickoff meeting, and depending on your timing, you might have a bar done in concert with a kickoff, or ideally, if you could even do it before the project officially begins. But here's a chance to ask these questions with a larger group. You're not talking about the project charter or the detailed project plan or any of that kind of material. This is just a chance to come together in a group. There are no wrong answers. If you need to describe it as a space where people can, people are free to say what they what's on their mind without judgment, any of those things that you might need to use as preface to the meeting, that's fine. But why these particular questions? The question about what are we trying to accomplish? This will often generate as many different answers as there are points of view on a particular project. But even if you took, just as an example, we're implementing a new discovery layer for special collections. Is that the extent of what we're trying to accomplish? And sometimes the intake you'll be collecting in a before action review for this first question, sometimes it comes in the category of what might be more familiar as non-functional requirements, like not just, again, the work or the infrastructure, the system, the tool, what it is we're trying to put in place, but stepping back a little bit from that and asking, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And sometimes you'll get answers like, well, we're trying to implement a new or modern search experience. We're trying to improve particular procedure or process. We might want to facilitate research. So you get a different sense of what it is you're trying to accomplish. And that's important because, again, if it's not reflected in any of those artifacts, it doesn't mean that it's not part of the effort. And it's a chance to get at this aspect of the project. Again, that isn't necessarily a task or a specific technical detail, but really represents the why, brings, sort of ties all of it together. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? The second question about what do we think will change? This is equally important because I've tried to think of a way to phrase it. We know something's going to change, either something new is introduced, something is going away, or something is just modified to a particular degree. But this question also gives people, again, if they're comfortable enough, depending on the dynamics of the group, the size of the group, their experience with you as a project leader, you have the chance to hear from stakeholders about what they might be concerned about, what they might be anxious, or even if I'll say, what they might be afraid is going to happen. And again, in my experience, giving people the opportunity to answer or respond or just share what they're thinking about what's going to change is just invaluable as a project manager and invaluable to the organization overall, because it gets at, again, how people are going to support it, how they're going to react to it, how again, the effort that you do, this technical thing that you might be getting done, how it's going to be received ultimately by the people who are going to be at a service desk or in a classroom teaching this. So taking the opportunity to discuss as a group of stakeholders, what is it that we think might change when we do this, tends to generate a lot of information, a lot of intake that, again, doesn't necessarily translate to a specific technical task or deliverable on your very detailed, very thorough project plan or in your project charter. So it's giving you additional information. And the third question, how will we know if we were successful? Again, I think few different experiences, and I'd love to hear from folks about how success is usually framed or discussed around projects where they work. So often we have an assignment, and it's either just we feel confident that we'll be successful, it's fingers crossed that we'll be successful, or we just think, well, I have to do this work. No one's really defined what would be a good outcome or a negative outcome beyond just completing the assignment. So we could certainly succeed in the sense that we stood up the new discovery layer for archives and special collections. If you define success as getting the thing to work, to actually be present. But beyond that, how will we know if we were successful? Again, what is it that we want the outcome to be? And when you walk through these three questions, and I try to have at least three big whiteboards in a room when I do this. one dedicated to each of these questions. And you can start with one, or just tell people, hey, if you have a thought in any one of these areas, feel free to start there. But once you have a good amount of conversation going and intake on the boards, again, if that's the format that you're choosing to conduct this, what you'll begin to see sometimes are themes across these three areas. And so one thing I definitely am mindful to do is when you look at the list of feedback you've received about what are we trying to accomplish. And if you go to the board with the information about how will we know if we are successful, in particular, those two sets of intake should line up in some way, because you could have a success measure, but if it's not reflected in something you're trying to accomplish, then you have a bit of disconnect. And hopefully that makes sense. I'm happy to talk through that a bit more. But even though you're asking for intake for these three particular questions, ideally, again, once you get enough conversation and intake present on the boards, you should see that there should be a way to walk back from how we know if we're successful up to what we're trying to accomplish, and even what will we think will change. And that change can be positive or negative or neutral. Depending on how much time you have, and again, the format that you're choosing to do this before action review, and I tend to want to ask folks about failure. And for me, and perhaps a lot of project managers, we have a different comfort factor with the idea of failure, talking about failure. That's certainly the case for me. And it's not, for me, what I enjoy about failure is that it's a really great way to look at how organizations think, or where they have gaps in their thinking. And to me, that's just endlessly fascinating. So, we made assumptions, or we didn't consider this, and it could be that it's just a one-off thing. Oh, we forgot about, the legacy data over here, or, some bit of sort of fact. But over time, that might be a pattern. We as an organization, we fail to think about non-typical users, or we fail to think about edge cases. We tend to just, focus our project planning and our thinking on the happy path or the more typical use, and we forget about this kind of thing. So if you adopt a bar as a practice for projects that you're responsible for, and you introduce that question around how might we fail, or make note of how you do fail, and that's degrees. Again, degrees, there's a spectrum of failing. It is a great sort of data set that you can gather over time to look at how your organization tends to think, or again, where they place value. And again, being in IT, certainly this other question is good to ask, but I think it applies to any type of project that you do, to just pose the question, what if we didn't do anything? And that could be, what if we didn't do anything right now? Or what if we didn't do anything for 6 months? And just to call that question and get people to react to it. And again, it gives you information, feedback on whether or not there's a different sense of urgency, just a different impression, again, about what it is that needs to happen, what we think was going to happen, how people throughout the organization, stakeholders and others, are perceiving what it is that we've chosen to do. So I wanted to refer to a few other approaches or frameworks that I think are similar to the concepts of a before action review and other things we may be familiar with as PMBAs. So certainly there's the culture of the 5 whys. And, as you can see from this slide, basically this is sitting with someone who's experiencing the issue and asking enough questions so you're getting to the root cause of the particular problem. So this is, I think, a standard example of something not working. And believe me, culture of the 5 whys, it's great if it happens in 5 questions, but it might actually be 5 hours. It could be 5 weeks of getting at it, but it just sounds better when you say the 5 whys, I guess. So looking at this as a model, again, of problem solving or figuring out what it is that we need to do. Certainly you could stop at the first question. You know, you might ask one question of somebody, you know, what are we trying to accomplish or what went wrong? And you have an answer there, a fuse blew. So you could try to push a solution right away and say, okay, well, we'll buy more fuses, or I confess I know nothing about fuses, so I don't know if you have to buy bigger fuses or stronger fuses, some kind of adjective about a fuse. And you could say, well, we have a solution. And certainly, again, we've all led projects or worked in organizations where we come up with an answer, it sounds good, it seems like it's going to address the problem, and why not? Let's try it and see what happens. So this idea, I think, of the 5 whys is, again, encouraging you to go a little bit deeper. Even just asking one other follow-up question will get you more information that much closer to a particular answer. Ultimately, the last question, they reach the point of information where they know there's no filter on the pump. And so ideally, by this practice of inquiry around a problem or around an effort, you get to what you hope is the root cause, which is, okay, we need to buy a filter. I'd take it a step further and I'd want to know why the circuit was designed without a filter to begin with, but that's a whole other thing. So again, this whole idea of leading a project through inquiry, whether it's before action review or, you know, 5 whys, it's really, to me, about developing this habit of asking questions and advocating for information, which is, by the way, exactly, for those of us working at libraries, is exactly what we would tell our patrons to do. Ask questions, advocate for the information you need. So to me, it makes sense that that be reflected in the work that we do inside of libraries as well. And, you know, as project managers, I think we're really, our role, hopefully, the value that we contribute is that we help solve problems. And again, why is this important? Because if we don't really identify what the business need is, what the true need is, then any investment that we make in a solution is bound to be out of alignment. And that may not be evident right away, but again, in my experience, it becomes evident soon enough. So again, question asking helps us validate what we believe we know, what we think we know, and it's also a really great exercise to help us get a list of what is unknown. And even just acknowledging that they're unknowns is a really important step in decision making. And again, try not to ask too many binary questions, try not to lead anyone in one direction or another about what you think the solution is or what the problem statement really is. Always ask a few questions around alternatives. And again, if you're looking at something technical, you know, is there a low-tech or a no-tech solution in addition to sort of the high-tech solution or the latest technical solution that's being put in front of you? One other approach to problem solving that I wanted to talk about is called the 4 S's. And again, how as organizations do we solve problems? How well do we do it? Do we tend to have awareness of some of the pitfalls of problem solving, such as, again, particularly in IT, sometimes I've experienced this, we have what's called the expertise trap, that we know a particular platform or programming language or an approach we've tried before, developed before, and we want to apply that. I think that's okay. and approaching a balance between what we know has worked in the past, and what we think can be applied going forward. And earlier this week, when I sent around some pre-information, I included a link to an article about Ron Johnson and his career trajectory from working at Target and Apple Retail, and his transition over to JCPenney. So a lot of similar experience and expertise with retail, very successful retail, a lot of experience in that field. And I think that if you've read that article or have a chance to, it's a really great example of expertise traps and solution bias, and how that really did not work out well for anybody. So just to sort of explain what the 4 S's of problem solving are, it's to state the problem, again, define it, what your constraints are, very much like a before action review. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? You know, what do we think some of the variables or constraints are, or aspects of change? What does success look like on the other end of this? To structure the problem for analysis. What do we think some of the potential causes might be? And that could come out through some of the questions you ask in a before action review. It could come out if you cherry pick from the idea of the culture of the 5 whys, so that you're making an investment here. I think like a before action review or the 5 whys, the 4 S's, represents an investment that you make or suggest as a project manager to try and think through the effort and think through the need or the question before you get to the solution generation. And then the 4th is actually selling this or convincing others, whether that be your department head, your sponsors or your stakeholders or whoever's in charge of the money, to sell them on your particular approach to that problem. I won't talk as much about design thinking, but again, I mention it as reference because I do think it demonstrates that same flow in better, making an attempt to better understand and define the problem, thinking it through in a more iterative process before you get into solution engineering and testing that. So this model for design thinking coming out of Stanford, I think, illustrates that fairly well. And another one, again, that I'll just reference quickly that some of you may be familiar with through different types of projects is appreciative inquiry. And again, it may not be a implementation or a typical software or IT project. You might, as a project manager, be asked to lead a type of organizational change, or again, just something that is affecting people more than infrastructure, different types of infrastructure. So appreciative inquiry is another model or framework, I think, in the same vein, just to be aware of as a project manager or a BA, that works through this flow of, you know, what do we do well as an organization? What are our strengths? How can we draw from them or utilize them to solve a particular problem? Okay, so I think I'm okay with time. We're at the halfway mark here. So at this point, what I wanted to do was see if there are any questions or need to clarify things that were brought up, or things I mentioned that would be interesting for us to discuss our different experiences with before we shift into trying to do a modified before action review. So what are folks thinking?
Can you ask again? Just reframe the question.
Sure. So do people have any questions about what was presented so far? It's just an opportunity to clarify anything that you might want to be clarified, or again, just to take a pause to see where we are. to respond to any of the questions that I had asked about how you might be utilizing any of these frameworks in your own libraries or organizations.
Hi, this is Robin. I have a question about the 5 whys.
Mhm.
And my question is, when you're working with an institution who doesn't normally do inquiry about why things are being done a certain way,
Mhm.
what the actual problem is, and that sort of thing, how can you get people thinking in that mindset and not necessarily feel confrontational when, querying
Sure.
why they do certain things?
Okay. So if you work at an institution where it may not be typical to ask why, or dig in a little bit more to someone else's area of work, or a problem that's reported or a decision that's made, how can you get your colleagues to be more comfortable with that mindset? And I'll answer, and it'd be great if anybody else has an idea or an experience to share as well. This is something that I do think takes time. One thing I like about running a project is that it does give you the opportunity to create a mini version of the work culture you ideally wish you could see at work. You can, within a project, choose to communicate a particular way. You can set up a different way to make decisions within the project, how transparent you want to be with sharing information. So I kind of like that opportunity that a project brings. So as a project manager, if you are running a project, I think you can take the lead within that environment to say, let's talk about this. I'd like to know more information. I think a way that is effective for getting people to come over to that mindset or open up to answering questions that you might be asking is if you approach it from a point of view that suggests that you want to learn how they do their work so you can be better positioned to help them. That was effective for me supporting the IT needs of a large library. I didn't have the level of expertise or familiarity that any person might have with a piece of software. So asking questions about, well, what do you normally do? How does that work for you? What do you think? And, again, phrasing that or approaching, asking those questions in a way that conveys that you are there to try to learn what they do so you can better support them. And that's how you see your role. I think it just takes developing a rapport with someone. If you, ask somebody those questions, they give you information. If you go back to your desk or back to wherever you're going to go, think it through, come up with a solution, ask a few more questions, and go back to that person, you've demonstrated that you care about what they told you, that you're not there, as an interrogation, or you're not there because somebody forced you to just show up, but you're showing them that, okay, I was thinking this through, I listened to what you told me, I learned something from it, it generated a few more questions for me, and you a bit more detail. So I think, again, just being honest about why you're there, why you're asking those questions, what you as an individual want to learn from them, showing that you are coming back and you are thinking about what they said and thinking about a way to help them. How does that seem as an answer? Do you think that's something that?
That's definitely very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Do other folks have approaches? Because again, as project managers, I think this is something that we've all experienced at some scale. scale, you know, to try and understand a particular problem. You know, when you're up with when you're planning those artifacts, you're not subject matter expertise in everything. So by design, I think we ask a lot of questions, and that can be annoying, right? You know, you want to be able to have, I guess, the approach. I don't think I have that great a personality. I think I'm super serious, but I at least try to be very genuine and honest in my asking those questions.
Melissa, we do have a question in the chat.
Okay. Is it okay if you read it to me, or I'll escape? And
If you want to escape, it's, I can read it to you, whatever works best. Can you see it?
I apologize. I guess I don't have the full lay of the land. I'm looking for that window where it normally shows like participants and stuff, but I just have this list. So
Should I read it to you?
oh, here, up here. Let's see. Chat 8. Okay, so some folks I think responded. Someone shared an article about premortems. I don't know how far to go back.
No, that's the first one.
Okay. So yes, premortem is also a term that I've heard that it always made me feel like, you know, I was in a medical setting. But, you know, before action, I've done that exercise as well. Helps identify risks. Someone attached a PDF. Thank you so much for that. And recently been tasked with redeveloping workflows between 5 departments. Special collections, that is huge. I want to use this before action review to introduce the new workflows. Would you recommend the bar in a separate meeting before? Yes, absolutely. I would recommend having the bar in a separate meeting before you begin to discuss the new workflows. A couple of reasons, and again, other folks, if you have reactions or thoughts to this, please feel free to share. But just my first reaction to an assignment like that, you're redeveloping workflows across departments. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of procedure. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of sense of familiarity and comfort and ownership. So there, to me, again, that feels like a lot of emotion that could be surfacing or just present while you go about this. The question in particular, the first 2 questions, what are we trying to accomplish? And what do you think will change? Actually, all 3, they're good questions. I really believe in those questions. And how will we know if we've been successful? I feel, you know, really go a long way toward getting this group of 5 departments, the staff there, to just take a moment before anything begins to happen and just start talking that through. Depending on how large those departments are, you could do it over 1 or 2 sessions. And one thing to be mindful of too, it's just an honest dynamic about being at work. Not everyone is comfortable giving their honest feedback if their boss is in the room or if someone higher up enough in administration is there. So just be mindful of that. That can come up sometimes, and there are ways to politically considerately deal with that. And you can also, if you really have a tense situation or the potential for one, you can offer people the opportunity to meet with you one-on-one and walk through the questions, or even submit some of it just to get a little bit of business going. Submit some of it over a form. And then you could still come into a room with the whiteboards and just, you know, get a little business going up on the boards that people respond to. Because that's another interesting element of running any kind of activity. You might have 1 or 2 talkers in the group, or people, if they haven't done a bar before, they might hesitate a little. You got to get them warmed up a bit. So sometimes getting a little bit of intake or otherwise ahead of the formal event is a good way to acclimate people while you're there. Oh, I apologize. Maybe my audio is cutting out.
If folks on the phone are able to mute their phones, I think that's where we're having some issues with like the crosstalk with the speakers.
Okay, I apologize for that. I know there's going to be a recording, but if the recording is lacking in quality in certain areas, I'm certainly able to take anything over email should anyone want to clarify something that I was saying, or just to talk in greater detail. Okay. So again, at this point, I think that might be what's in chat for now. I'm going to minimize that. So we can do a couple of things. We can continue to talk about the practice, how people use this framework or think they might be able to use this framework, or we could jump into what would be a modified version. And the way I thought that might work is, again, I think on Wednesday, I emailed to the list a bit of background information about building renovation, which might equate to the amount of information you would have, or you would know going into something as a stakeholder, and that we could just walk through the questions and, again, just sort of get the feel for how you might do this. Do folks want to try that, or do you want to keep talking?
That sounds good to me.
Okay. We maybe have one new chat. Sure, sounds good. All right, wonderful. Okay, so if folks had time to look through that bit of background information, and again, I know might feel a bit artificial doing it this way. We're not in the same room together, and you're reading a very brief set of bullet points about what we think we're going to do. But a couple of things, just for the exercise, again, feel free to draw on your own work experience. If you've ever gone through a renovation or worked someplace where a renovation was happening, think about what you know about busy service points in libraries. And again, I think it's okay to feel like you don't necessarily know everything about it too, because again, that's the spirit of the exercise. The spirit of a before action review is that you want to just get people asking questions and saying, I don't understand this, or, what is it that we're really trying to do? So based on the information you have, I'm in the room with you, and the first thing I'm going to say is, what is it that you think we're hoping to accomplish as an organization with this renovation? And whoever wants to put up an answer, I'll type it into the slide. And it could be anything. Again, no wrong answers. What is it? And this is a good way to develop empathy for the people in the room when you lead this. What is it that you think we're trying to accomplish with this initiative?
Apologies, I didn't read the pre-work.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, so I'll go a minute here to the chat, because someone set a great example. Better facilities for students. And I'll tell you another thing that I do once we've got all the intake collected. See this word better? This is something that we need to come back to. So you'll see when people we want to improve this, or we want to do more of this, or we want better facilities. I'm gonna be drawn to that and come back to it later, not during the flow of the before action review, but I'm gonna wanna follow up with that and say, okay, let's define better. What's a measure and a target for the facilities for our students? How are we defining better? And when I mentioned earlier in the hour, that once you have your content going in under the 3 questions, that you want to make sure to walk back from your definitions of success to what you're trying to accomplish. So if what you're trying to accomplish is better facilities for students, in addition to the refining of better to have a measure and a target for what better facilities are, that should be reflected somehow in a success measure. Because if that's what you're trying to accomplish, you should have an impact measurement for success. Students can find a desk and place to sit in busy, absolutely. Students can find a place to study. So again, when you get this type of information, again, you can see this is all wonderful to prevent a backup of patrons, all this. So what you're getting at, again, is more the on the ground, everyday perception or reaction or relation to what it is that's taking place. And you may have a project plan or a list of deliverables that's about electrical outlets and signage and where the restrooms go and carpet and all these very, practical things that need to get done, which looks like the actual project and is the work of the project. But again, this notion of accomplishing, I think, is much more richly reflected in these responses. So I hope you're seeing that as well. So to prevent a backup. Backup of patrons and services. And again, this isn't just a one-time meeting. You're getting all this, and I know it's a hypothetical, but I'm excited about the information because it's just a perfect example. You're getting all this really rich information to act on in larger ways to prevent a backup of patrons and services. Someone in that room offered up that information because it's something they perceive, it's something they experience, it's something they want to be addressed, and it's something that they are hopeful that the effort will address, that they would be excited, they would be willing to support you, that they're going to see it and you as a success when you reopen the renovated space and they see there is no queue forming at the service desk, there's no backlog of services. So this is all wonderful. So we can move to the next question, which is, what do we think will change? So technically, this other bit of librarians can provide more instruction session to students. That is definitely something we can put in the accomplishment board, but we could also, just for the sake of today, librarians will be providing more instruction, because if they can, it means they're likely to. And if it's R. Pike who sent that in, R. Pike, if it's okay for me to modify your suggestions, again, just for the sake of the exercise, if I said, what do we think will change? And someone offered, librarians will be providing more instruction sessions. Now, to the ear, that can sound like a positive or a negative. Again, something that's going to change, something that's going to make somebody anxious, concerned, feel stressed out, or excited. That whole range of emotion that comes with anything that changes or affects your work. So paying attention to this, that librarians will be providing more instruction sessions. Again, as PM, what you have the opportunity to do, and it may not become, again, a task or a deliverable in your project plan, but it's information that you as PM have a responsibility to take, I think, to your project sponsors, to the relevant department, and say, we're renovating this space. There's going to be new classrooms built, new teaching space built. The increased visibility is going to most likely increase the demand for more instruction sessions. I know that you're not hiring any more teaching librarians, So how can we anticipate the need and prepare for the need to deliver instruction given the same number of resources, but potentially an increase in demand? And again, that's something that comes out of this before action review process, talking to the stakeholders, thinking about the work or the effort in its broadest possible sense. And in this case, I think you can pull out particular tasks or deliverables to add to your project plan. So sometimes that happens as well. It might be, again, things in the non-functional requirement. It may be actual work that you hadn't thought of yet that you need to reflect. So it could be making sure that there's technical orientation to the instruction rooms. You might need a new reservation or calendaring system. It's not that when you walk through this process that you're not adding to the project plan, you're very much doing that as well. So other things, more modern spaces for staff, and staff work areas will change. Staff, this is very good. Staff may have to work in temporary locations. So something like that is a great example of something that everybody figures will happen, but you might, within the project, it might not be detailed right up front. It might be this gray area throughout the whole middle of the project that, again, is a real source of tension or uncertainty. You know, where's our swing space? You know, or again, a whole list of tasks and deliverables and integration work with telecom or other things that comes from doing that or thinking that through. If you have to work in swing space, do you have to change campus directories? Do you have to, you know, can you keep the same phone extension? Does that put you to a remote location on campus, which could affect your ability to participate in certain meetings? Do you have conferencing software to address that particular need? Does the swing space have the same level of, the same Wi-Fi strength, all those kinds of things? And again, it's all of this that when we're thinking about the what of the project, well, we're going to get new workspace. Isn't that great? And so a lot of the spotlight and attention and conversation is naturally put on, hey, we're going to have new space. But the reality is, in order to get to that new space, the outcome, we're going to need swing space. And let's spend a little bit of time thinking about the quality of work life for the length of time that we anticipate needing that swing space. So hopefully, again, I know I'm talking more through this than you would normally want your folks in the audience to be taking that role. But hopefully in doing so, it shows you, again, the value of information, the type of information you're getting that is not normally the first thing that comes to mind in a project plan. I see that we have 5 minutes remaining. And so if you'll pardon the course correction here, there's something I'd like to show you. I'm in the middle of managing major building renovation that's bringing in a lot of high-tech spaces. And one of them is what's called a visualization studio. So I did a bar with them, their team, and I went through, I don't know if folks can see this. Let me close this a little. With them, so you can see that we got the same sort of type of feedback. We're creating a space that is easy to use for the average student. And so I went back in and said, okay, easy and average, we would need to define those terms a bit more to increase awareness among students that the space is for them, this very high tech looking 360 round visualization studio. So what does it mean to really increase awareness? And I want to show a few other things here, because this question under what do we think will change? Right now on campus, we have two main libraries. that are at about a 15 to 20-minute walking distance from each other. So they're accessible, but they're still, you know, at a distance. So what do we think will change? And someone offered this: will humanities staff and students come back to Hill? And again, that to me is so valuable because it's not a task in the implementation of this very technical space, but it's a likely outcome or impact, and how, again, as project manager, whether it's your responsibility directly or your responsibility to refer that outcome to the appropriate people. How can we anticipate redistribution of faculty, staff, and students who, for the year that we've been closed, have shifted to another location on campus? How do we anticipate managing the need if and when they all come back to this particular location? And just continuing with that thought, they're like, would that change the duration or the number of class visits? How much more programming is expected here? So this is a really great exercise, I think, to get at a lot of unanticipated needs, you know, and outcomes from the project or the effort that you're undertaking. So I'm going to share all of this with you. So we know we have the recording, and I'm going to share the presentation and slide deck, and we have a few more minutes for questions. Again, I'm sorry we kind of had to skip the last question in our practice exercise, but I did want to show you a real life result from walking through those 3 questions. And again, any sort of last minute questions or thoughts? Go back to chat. You are welcome. I'm glad it was helpful. I do, again, appreciate everybody's time. Again, during the first full week of work and on a Friday afternoon. And please feel free to email me either directly to my Gmail, or if we want to continue the discussion on the project managers list, I'm happy to do that as well. Okay, great. Thank you.